Hello and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. Today I was going to go through symbolism of the fifth house, or Bhava as it's known as in Sanskrit, and this is from a Vedic astrology or Jyotish perspective. So let's get into it. So just a few notes beforehand. All of my teaching videos on the subject of Vedic astrology or Jyotish are in my concepts playlist, so they can all be found there. And wherever you see a double asterisk in one of my talks, that means I have a teaching video on that topic, so you can find out more if that concept is new to you. Videos to watch before this one, again, especially if you're new. North, South, and East Indian style charts. I use North Indian style charts in my work. Introduction to navigating a birth chart. Introduction to the constellations or Rashis. Constellation or Rashi categories. Also, benefic and malefic planets or grahas. Also, for this particular talk, I have a playlist on all the planets and or grahas and their symbolism. And specifically, I would look at symbolism of the sun or Surya for this one because we are talking about the fifth house. And then also, if you're interested in more content like this, I have a growing list of uh, videos on the different houses or bhavas, and they're all in that houses bhavas playlist. And you might start at the top with that playlist, and that would be the lagna, which is also known as the ascendant rising sign first house, because that's the first house we typically look at when we're analyzing a chart, and it sets the tone really for the whole chart. So I would start there. All right, so let's go ahead. Okay, so the fifth house or fifth bhava, it's also known as the putra sthana. Putra means son or daughter, and sthana means house. So it's a house where we typically assess children. The fifth house of the natural zodiac, and again, the natural zodiac is when you take the first constellation, which is Aries or Mesha, and you put it in the first house. So if you look at this chart on the right here, that's what I have. I have the natural zodiac because that little one in the corner of the top square is the lugna, also known as the ascendant rising sign first house. And the little one there actually does not indicate the house number, it indicates the constellation Rashi number. So the first constellation of Rashi is Aries. So Aries in the first house is what this chart means, just from the little glyph or little numbers and stuff. You can get that from that. And you can see in a North Indian style chart, you count backwards or counterclockwise. So if you count backwards inclusively from the first house, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you end up in the fifth house, which is this kind of pinkish triangle on the left lower side of the chart. That's the fifth house. Okay, so the fifth house in the natural zodiac is ruled by Leo, or the constellation Leo, or Simha, as it's known as in Sanskrit. And Leo is ruled by the planet Sun, or Surya, as it's known as in Sanskrit. This is the only constellation that the Sun owns or rules over. So that's significant. The other thing to know about Leo or Simha, and again, you might see my constellation categories to get more information about this, but Leo is a fixed fire sign. So fixed meaning that it is not something that's is very wavering in its energy, in contrast to a dual sign, which kind of can waver back and forth, or a movable sign, which is very active and churning. This is pretty steady in its energy. It's also a fire sign, meaning that fire is a very active, transformative type of energy. So fixed fire in Sanskrit is a stira agni. Okay. The other thing to know about the fifth house is that it's a dharma sthana. And so dharma means duty. That's kind of loosely translated as duty in English, but it's actually more than duty, because duty kind of has this, I think, sense of obligation, which is part of, I think, what dharma means, but dharma, I think, is more comprehensive than that. Dharma is more about like somebody's inborn faculty of existence. So this is kind of like what they're born to do, the part that they're meant to play in the world, in humanity, whatever time and space that they've, been born. And you could even think of this as like somebody's destiny. Yeah. So it's an important house in that regard. The fifth house is also a trikona. Sometimes you'll hear people say kona, but it's a trikona. And trikonas indicate unconscious actions. So, again, if we kind of refer back to the first house is both a trikona and a kendra. A kendra is a house that has conscious actions, and a trikona house is unconscious actions. So, especially the first house is very important because that's where the conscious and unconscious actions meet. Um, so, the other thing here is that it's the fifth house is also considered a punya sthana. So, punya means good karma. So, again, when you're looking at the fifth house, also the ninth house, those are two punya sthanas, and so you can start to assess what potentially good karma somebody has. Okay. Then, if we get into other indications of the fifth house, if we look at health, vitality can be assessed here because, again, if we draw back to the sun, and again, I have a whole video on symbolism of the sun generally represents general health, general vitality, that sort of thing. Also, the heart is often seen or assessed here. Some people use the fourth house because the kind of the border of the fourth and fifth house is the diaphragm, which separates kind of the upper thorax from the lower thorax, that sort of thing. But a lot of people, including myself, typically assess the heart from the fifth house. Also related to the heart, circulation and blood can be assessed here. And it's also where we look at upper GI function. So things like stomach, liver, gallbladder, pancreas, and spleen. And then also, like liver and spleen are very important for production of blood. So you can see how some of this stuff is overlapping. Okay, so those are major indications of health related to the fifth house. The fifth house is also related to intellect. And so from that, so this is something I look at when I'm just looking at like how does somebody process their world, the information that they're receiving from the world, whether internal, from like the intuition and that sort of thing, or the sensory things like what are people saying and doing around them? What is the environment providing them? And how are they integrating all that and making decisions and navigating all that? Yeah. So from intellect, we can get discernment because again, people are, sorting through all this information they have and how are they making sense of it and then moving and making decisions and moving forward. Education is sometimes listed here. I did mention when I went through the fourth house. Well, actually, the second house is kind of education from your family, childhood, not really formal education. The third house is related to primary school education, so pretty young education. And the fourth house I mentioned is related to kind of like high school, college, undergraduate level education. And so the fifth house, it is listed as education. I don't typically use it to assess education. It's for me and the people I learned from is that this is more a house, especially because we're considering intellect here, somebody's ability to handle education and what level of education. So if their fifth house is very, very strong, this is somebody who has the ability potentially to achieve high levels of formal education because their intellect is good at processing the information that they receive. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they will get an education. It's a different thing. So again, I look at capacity or ability of education from the fifth house, and as do my teachers of Jyotish. So, and then intellect, again, intelligence, intuition, but again, intuition's part of it, but not the whole, kit and caboodle here of what we're looking at with intellect. Memory as well can be assessed here. And again, analytical ability, like how are people integrating and analyzing all the information internally, externally, and making sense of it, and then moving forward in their life. The fifth house is the Putrasthana. So people who are, this house represents different people. Obviously, children is the first one that comes to mind. But also mother's family can be assessed here because this is the second house to the fourth house. So again, second house is, family as well as inner circle, and fourth house represents mom. This can also be paternal grandfather because it is the ninth from the ninth. So the ninth house is father, guru, authority, government. So father of father is ninth house from the ninth house, and that would land you in the fifth house here. Um, Also students. And this we'll see as we go through more of the indications here. Students can be assessed here because they are sort of like children, people that we develop and support, but also because of the intellect function and also the creativity function. There's a lot of teaching and advisement related to the fifth house. So you'll see as we talk more here. Then religion, actually, which may not be obvious at first, but because of the relationship, um, the fifth house is kind of a reflection of the ninth house, and the ninth house is kind of the first house we go to assess religion. Um, but it's also, the ninth of the ninth. So, father's religion, guru's religion, so kind of authority, and so that's part of kind of education. It's kind of the religious milieu that we grew up in. Um, and the other thing is that it's a punyasthana. So there is such a notion as family karma. Yeah. So, um, you know, the fifth house is indicative of the punya or good karma that father or guru has developed through their religious practice. And we inherit some of that. So that's part of why the fifth house represents religion. And so that can show up in different ways. So specific disciplines like mantra, tantra, yantra, like different kind of if we're talking about like Indian culture, um, and you can translate this into other cultures or other religious disciplines and stuff like that. Disciples. So rather than just students, where students can be more of a secular type of relationship, the disciple is more of like a religious supporting of younger people and bringing them up through a tradition. Also, pilgrimage is a possibility. Because again, the ninth house also represents, besides father and guru and authority, represents long distance travel. So, especially if it's nine to the ninth house to the ninth house, that's long distance travel that father has taken. So, especially if there's some uh, pilgrimage, or again, gets back to punya, right? Good karma and things that father has done, such as go on a pilgrimage, then that might also be indicated for us. Yeah. The other thing here is that the Ishta Devata is related to the fifth house. And the Ishta Devata is a personal deity that one worships. And that can be personal to self, but it can also be personal to a family. And again, because we're talking about father's religion, um, uh, it can be either personal or familial deity that's worshipped. The other thing is that this fifth house can represent the opposite of all this punyasthana, because again, if the fifth house is very challenged, it might actually indicate a fall from grace. And that again, first of all, comes from ninth bhava to the ninth bhava. So again, coming from father's religion or guru's religion, if maybe they've fallen from grace, or there's some negative karma there. But also it's the eighth from the 10th. So the eighth house is typically a very challenging, negative type house, and the 10th house represents career and fame. So if there's a kind of a negative energy associated with career and fame, will show up here typically. So again, it's not just like a fall from grace in kind of more religious or spiritual way, but potentially a fall from grace if this is a very challenged house from secular, daily, world, career, uh, that sort of stuff. Fifth house also represents creativity, um, because again, we're talking about the sun here, and so things that are very energizing and uplifting and that sort of thing. So this can be like the creative arts, such as music, poetry, but also Leo. Again, if we're referring back to the natural fifth house of the natural zodiac, Leo represents a stage. So especially arts that are represented on stage, such as theater, movies, film, that sort of thing. Also potentially books and authorship, and children, because children are a form of creativity, right? Creating children. And so also this like sun, because sun again is embedded in this fifth house very strongly and deeply. The sun is like vitality and pleasure, and it's kind of like that feeling of when spring comes around. And we finally, like right now, we're about 10 days out from winter solstice. And so just day by day, we're getting, a few more minutes of light. And already it's just like, oh, okay. Internally, you're like, yay, the sun's coming back, bring back some energy. So again, creativity utilizes a lot of vitality, creativity, energy. It's uplifting to the person doing it as well as the person receiving it, and especially it's like fun and playful and spontaneous and amusing. Like these are the sorts of values that a creative person has, like whether it's in the form of creative art or like having and raising children. Um, creativity is definitely important for the fifth house. The other thing the fifth house can be looked at is gains through partner, because it is the 11th house, which is the house of income and gains through a partner. Because a partner is the seventh house. So the fifth house is the 11th house to the seventh house. So that's another thing. And if the career is being assessed and the fifth house is strong, or the fifth lord is involved in, the career assessments pretty strongly, then you would typically find people who have careers related to big categories of creativity, children, intelligence, religion, the things that we've talked about. And then, more specifically, things like from the creative side, entertainers, writers, film, TV, theater. From children, like pediatricians, midwives, or people who create children related products. Intelligence, so teaching, advising, especially because, again, when we integrate all of these, when we integrate stage with children with intelligence, then we get like teaching and advising. And then film, TV, theater, it's like a bigger platform, and probably internet, I should have put in the list here. I'll try to remember to put that in, just a bigger platform to, um, share that creative drive to support, others. And then, of course, religion. So different sacred traditions and, the specifics there can vary culture to culture, but again, religion can be associated here as well. So that's a fifth house, fairly sweet and short and simple today compared to a lot of my talks. So as always, thanks for stopping by and listening to the talk. Appreciate all your support for my work and channel. All of my teaching videos on the subject of Vedic astrology are my concepts playlist. They can all be found there so that they're easy to find. I do offer personal birth chart readings on Zoom. So if that's of interest, you can email heartlightastro@yahoo.com if you'd like more information about that. And then I do have another YouTube channel called Nature Source Care, where I discuss other Vedic arts such as Ayurveda and yoga, as well as other alternative forms of medicine such as homeopathy and naturopathic medicine that's out there if that's interesting or useful to you as well. So, as always, I hope you found this interesting, helpful, useful as you navigate the energy cycles of your own life. And until the next one, take care. Namaste.